I'm Kyle Cleveland with TUJ's Institute of Contemporary Asian Studies. Jake and I both are from Missouri, and about over Christmas we were coming out of a flight out of Kansas City and ran into each other on the plane. And I said, "What are you doing lately, Jake?" And he said that this book has just come out. He's also written a book, published in French only, about a post-war history of the Yakuza that hopefully will come out in English press eventually. And he's written a short book that I think you can get as an ebook about Bitcoin, which probably comprises some of what he's going to say this evening. Jake is, I think, really well known for his expertise on the Japanese police and Yakuza. He came to Japan in 1988, is a graduate of Sophia University. He's been working in Japan as a reporter since 1993, first for a major Japanese newspaper, writing in Japanese, covering everything from crime, court cases to high school baseball. But much of it was devoted to covering Japan's mafia, the Yakuza. He's the author of a true crime memoir, Tokyo Vice, an American reporter on the police beat in Japan, which, by the way, Jeff Kingston, the head of our Asian studies, had cited that as one of the top 10 books written about Japan in the year that it came out. And this forthcoming book, Pay the Devil in Bitcoin. Jake is a low-ranking, he assures me very low-ranking, Zen Buddhist priest. And he covers Japan's popular culture and subcultures, crime, politics, and social issues for the Daily Beast, Forbes, the Times of London, and other publications. So Jake is going to talk, and then we'll have a Q&A. I should mention, and I'll remind you later, that the Q&A is going to be off the record. But we are recording this, and in a couple of weeks it'll be available on our YouTube channel. So let's welcome Jake Adelstein.
Thank you. This is a much bigger crowd than I expected. I actually thought there would be about 10 people, mostly in shirts with some kind of libertarian slogan or Space Invader slogans on it, but I'm pleased at the turnout. So I'd like to say in advance, tonight we'll be talking about Bitcoin, and there's a ton of alternative currencies out there called altcoins, or there's NEM, which CoinCheck helped make famous. There's Jesus Coin, one of my favorites, which started as a satirical thing, but apparently may be bigger than Jesus in the next few months. There's even a new one called Vice Coin coming out. I'm writing an article about it. The slogan is "Get paid to watch porn," so I think that's going to be volatile. But there's all these currencies. We're going to be focusing on Bitcoin. And for people who are experts in this field, if I'm so glad the Bitcoin Jesus isn't here today, which is Roger Ver, who makes Japan his home. But we're tracing the history of Bitcoin in this talk in a way that makes people understand it, and the way that I got to know it, which is through crime. So the book that we're talking about now, Pay the Devil in Bitcoin, it is actually a pun on a Japanese phrase, which is Jigoku no Satomo Kani Shidai, which is even in the depths of hell, just depends on how much money you have, which is a very Japanese expression. And we thought it would make a good title for a Bitcoin book. I'd also like to say that we have a surprise guest here tonight, which is the co-author of this book, who actually is the main author of this book, Natalie Kyoko-Stuki. Would you come up here? So we worked on this book for about 2 years, and during that time she had little Lisa, and I didn't know whether she'd be able to make this talk or not because she was in Switzerland, but she did come here. She is the brains behind the technical part of this book. Like for me, understanding what Bitcoin was very, very hard because I'm not very much of a technical person. She's the one who goes to the talks. She's the one who understands all the intricacies of currencies things. So if it's a technical question, you'll have to ask her. And her daughter Lisa, who is about 1 year old, is also very bright. And I hear she'll be handling security at the new revised CoinCheck very soon.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm so happy to see that so many people came to this talk today. Jake will do a great job, and I'm very glad. Thank you so much, and enjoy this talk.
Okay. So, who here can use a computer? Raise your hand. Okay. Who here can build a computer from scratch that works? Okay. You're the kind of people that can explain and understand Bitcoin. The rest of us, we just use it. But when writing this book and trying to explain what the hell Bitcoin was, I read through book after book after book. And I didn't find a very good explanation until I got to this affidavit involving a case where 2 special agents stole money from a Silk Road investigation. And this detective, who is called the blockchain wizard, Tigran Gambarian, gave in his affidavit the best explanation of Bitcoin I've ever heard, which I will read out loud for you. I think it's possible to find the affidavit online, but not easy. And listen carefully, because it is hard to follow this. But keep in mind that he was speaking to a federal judge, and especially judges that are appointed by the Trump administration aren't particularly bright. So this is a really good way to understand what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is a form of decentralized convertible virtual currency that exists through the use of an online decentralized ledger system, the blockchain. Okay. So in other words, most of the time when you use currency, you have the bank, you have a sort of third party guaranteeing that what you have. But with Bitcoin, and when they created it and the way it's designed is so that everybody shares the burden. And basically it's distributed across the internet. Everybody participates in making Bitcoin, everybody participates in checking and confirming that it exists. You can't kill it without killing the internet. It's almost impossible to counterfeit. So that's the decentralized part. Nobody controls it. You can't make more of it, you can't make less of it, you can't counterfeit it. It's designed to max out at 21 million coins in 2040. So it is finite. So it is a well-planned thing. I mean, there may be somebody bright enough to come along who can figure out how to forge the blockchain or how to make more Bitcoin, but so far nobody's done it. While Bitcoin mainly exists as an internet-based form of currency, it is possible to print out the necessary information, exchange Bitcoin via a physical medium, which is called cold storage or paper wallets. These paper wallets is basically when you take it off the internet and you store it somewhere. It is almost like cash if you cash it into the Bitcoin exchange. Apparently in the wild days of Mt. Gox, which was once the world's largest Bitcoin trading exchange and also was created in Japan, sometimes they had it stuffed like in the cushions at the offices. So it wasn't particularly well managed. The currency is not issued by any government, bank, or company, but rather is generated and controlled through computer software operating a decentralized network. To acquire Bitcoins, a typical user will purchase them from a Bitcoin seller or exchanger. It is also possible to mine Bitcoin by verifying others' users' transactions. Bitcoin is just one form of digital currency, and there are a significant number of other varieties of digital currencies. So getting into mining, like how the whole process of mining is really complicated. And it's very technical, but essentially, in order to encourage people to do these complicated transactions that generate Bitcoin and also ensure that there's not counterfeiting going on, there's a bit of an incentive. So if you do the technical work and you solve the problem, you get a little bit of Bitcoin yourself. So that was one of the things that helped popularize this. It was kind of an incentive to make the currency do better because you get rewarded for your work. In the beginning, you could do it with a very small number of computers without much computing power. The more Bitcoins you have and the more people you have mining, the harder it gets to do. Bitcoin exchangers typically accept payments of fiat currency. Fiat currency is real money. That's what's in your wallet. Currency which derives its value from government regulation or law or other convertible currencies in order to obtain Bitcoins. When a user wishes to purchase Bitcoins from an exchanger, the user will typically send payment in the form of fiat or other convertible virtual currency to an exchanger, usually via wire, for the corresponding numbers of Bitcoins based on a fluctuating exchange rate. The exchanger, often for a commission, will then typically attempt to broker the purchase with another user of the exchange that is trying to sell Bitcoins, or in some instances will act as the seller itself. If the exchanger can place a buyer with the seller, the transaction can be completed. When a user acquires Bitcoins, they are sent to the user's Bitcoin address. This is somewhat analogous to a bank account number or a safety deposit box, which is comprised of a case-sensitive string of letters and numbers amounting to a total of 26 to 35 characters. The user can then conduct transactions with other Bitcoin users by transferring Bitcoins to their Bitcoin's address via the internet. So basically every Bitcoin, or every amount of Bitcoins that you have, it has two things. It has like a location, think of it as like your vault number, and it has a key. You need both of those to get the money out. So like if you went to a bank and you're depositing money in a bank vault, or in Japan depositing with the post office, if you knew the post box number, you can tell them I've got money in there, but if you don't have the key, they won't let you take the money out. But if you have a key and you don't know which of the post office boxes is, you can't get the money out either. So you need both. And that's the sort of the double safe system there. That is an incredibly general explanation, but that's basically how it works. All Bitcoin transactions are recorded on what is known as the blockchain. This is essentially a distributed public ledger that keeps track of all Bitcoin transactions, incoming and outgoing, and updates approximately 6 times per hour. The blockchain records every Bitcoin address that has ever received a Bitcoin and maintains records of every transaction and all the known balances for each Bitcoin address. Digital currencies including... Okay, so the blockchain is really important because for those of you who haven't been following criminal activities these days, Bitcoin is not cool to use anymore because the blockchain, as time has gone by, people figured out how to read it. Thus the famous blockchain wizard, Tigran Gambaryan in the IRS, who is famous for being able to correlate data, exchange accounts, times, dates, IP addresses, to figure out where money has gone. So in the last couple months, criminals are no longer using Bitcoin. They're using Monero, or they're using Zcash, or other things. So in a way, Bitcoin has, sort of became famous through criminal activity, through things like the Silk Road, because people learned that you could actually use it to purchase things, mostly drugs and pornography. But now it has become legitimate enough and well understood enough that it's not really particularly useful for criminals. And at the time we were writing this book, it was like Bitcoin was synonymous with crime. Digital currencies, including Bitcoin, have many known legitimate uses. And for a special agent to say this at the time was kind of revolutionary. Like, wow, Bitcoin has legitimate use. However, much like cash, Bitcoins can be used to facilitate illicit transactions and to launder criminal proceeds, given the ease at which they can be used to move money anonymously. As is demonstrated hereon, however, in some circumstances, Bitcoin payments may be traced to accounts at traditional financial institutes using the blockchain. So that is a very long-winded but concise and accurate explanation of what Bitcoin is. It is a digital currency. It is not controlled by one person. We all control it. It's dispersed over the internet. You can't counterfeit it. You can use it for transactions. It has whatever value people decide that it has a value. So you can go to a BitCurrency exchange and you can look at Bitcoin or CoinFlyer or CoinCheck or whatever and look what what Bitcoin is trading at. But if I had a cold wallet with Bitcoin in it, let's say two Bitcoin, I could go to someone. I could go over to Stuki over there and go, hey, how about giving me 20,000, even though it's now trading at 8,000? And if she chooses to do that, it's her business. So it's whatever I want to do directly. I don't have to follow the exchange rate. But I'm probably going to because it seems safer that way. So you hear lots of things about virtual currency exchanges being hacked. Bitcoin in 2014, when Mt. Gox collapsed, which was once the world's largest Bitcoin exchange, took a huge hit because people are like, it's not safe. It can be hacked. No, Bitcoin itself can't be hacked, but the virtual currency exchanges can be hacked, and there's no federal agency backing them up, guaranteeing you will get your money back. How many people have been following the CoinCheck thing? Is there anybody who's lost money in CoinCheck or has their money in limbo? Okay. So the Japanese government last year, and I'm getting ahead of myself because we're going to go all the way back to the roots of this thing. The Japanese government decided last year that they were going to register currency exchanges, cryptocurrency exchanges. So they set up a process and they're requiring that you have a certain amount of capital, that you're able to identify who's using the currencies, that you can trace back the currencies, that it's not being used for criminal enterprises. They're not very happy with some exchanges that are using things like Monero, which have a very anonymous value and are very hard to trace, which makes them attractive to criminals. So far they have recognized 16 establishments. CoinCheck was not one of them, but CoinCheck spent so much money on advertising and had such a wonderful interface that many people just assumed that the Japanese government had given it the seal of approval. My personal feeling is at this point that it will go, opinion, not objective fact, that it will probably go under, and that most of the people, and many of the people who have put their money in there to get their virtual currency won't get their virtual currencies out, and they won't get their money. And it'll end up a big mess like Mt. Gox. And whether the Japanese police actually have the ability to trace the hacked NEM, I'm rather dubious about. So let's go back to the beginning. We don't know when Satoshi Nakamoto was born, the so-called creator of Bitcoin. We don't even know if he's really Japanese. He has a very Japanesey name. But we do know when Mark Karplus was born. And Mark Karplus is important. So Japan has this wonderful connection to Bitcoin in the sense that, you know, the first creator of it is supposedly somebody Japanese. And the first person to actually make Bitcoin trades possible was Mark Karplus, who was totally into Japanese culture and created Mt. Gox. Without Mark Karplus, whether you think he's a big oaf or not, there would be no Bitcoin boom today. A tremendous contribution. Without, you know, basically Tokyo being the sort of Mecca or Jerusalem or whatever you'd like to call it, the capital of Bitcoin, we wouldn't be seeing Bitcoin trading at 30,000. It would just be some weird thing traded by libertarians and cryptographers and people who were into alternative lifestyles or economic theories, and it wouldn't be something that is, you know, that people at J.P. Morgan and Morgan Stanley are now thinking about how can we cash in on this. So we're going to start. So Mark Karplus is born in Paris. He starts working and doing various computer programming, other things. By 2007, he is in Japan working for software companies, doing programming. One of the things I like about Mark, and we interviewed him several times for this book and over the last 2 years, is I asked him, like, Mark, what do you like about Japan? And he's like, Japanese people are so honest. He says, you know, I used to come here and I'd be coding on a park bench, and sometimes I'd forget my laptop and I'd leave it there, and I'd come back and they would always be there, or some people would race after me and give me the laptop. Now that's a wonderful story about how honest Japan is, but that's not the kind of quality you want in someone who's going to handle $500 million worth of Bitcoin a couple of years down the road. So while Karplus is goofing around in Japan, so is Jed McCaleb, who at the time creates this website to purchase trading cards, to exchange trading cards for this game called Magic the Gathering. Has anyone ever played Magic the Gathering? Okay, what is Magic the Gathering?
It's been a few years, but basically it's a role-playing game where the cards are valued almost like baseball cards.
So what is the best card I could have in Magic the Gathering? It would let me defeat my opponents and listen to their widow's wail.
It's been 15 years, I'm sorry.
Okay. So while he's doing this in 2008, the world, there's a financial crisis, you know, everything collapses, and on a cryptographer's bulletin board, Satoshi Nakamoto comes up with this idea starts talking about, you know, why don't we create an alternative currency that's not dependent upon governments, it's not dependent upon banks, that we can exchange things directly, we can cut out the middleman. So instead of having this, you know, these kind of financial crises generated by unscrupulous, stupid banks and institutions and countries, we can cut out the middleman. We can do to currency what the internet did to information, and that sounds like a great idea. On October 31st, on August 18th, 2008, Bitcoin.org is created. On October 31st, 2008, Nakamoto publishes a scientific paper titled "Bitcoin: A Peer-to-Peer Electronic Cash System." Now that isn't the most exciting of titles. You know, you don't think a revolution is going to start with a paper called Bitcoin: A Peer-to-Peer Electronic Cash System, but by God, academia has some value because that's where it all begins. So one of the problems with digital currency has always been something that's digital is easy to duplicate. It's easy to forge. You know, one of the problems with cash is, right, and they're constantly doing things that makes it hard to counterfeit, you know, yen or cash or US dollars. You know, they add various colors, things, they add streams, they use different fibers. With digital currency, the problem is wouldn't it be so easy to reproduce the currency? So this idea of making everyone verify the transactions, they call proof of work. So by recording all the transactions and time-stamping them in the blockchain, they hope to prevent people from counterfeiting currency. And suddenly they had a working idea. Okay, so we have a currency, you can't reproduce it. It has a limited thing. It will eventually reach a climax, so there's scarcity. So it won't go on forever. And you can't keep printing more of it. It'll print out at this rhythm we've already established. And then they created the software, and they uploaded the software. And then on January 3rd, 2009, the first block is mined, enough equations are done that this Bitcoin is produced, and they call this the Genesis block, or block 0. So you can go back on the blockchain and you can see the birth of baby Bitcoin. It's kind of a miracle. I mean, you can trace it all back from the very first. And February 11th, 2009, Satoshi Nakamoto publicly posted the Bitcoin software in an accompanying essay. Satoshi Nakamoto published his last post on the Bitcoin forum. And Bitcoin starts to take off. But it's hard to buy Bitcoin. You can't find it anywhere. You have to basically know somebody who knows somebody who's into this whole cryptographers network to purchase some. So it's slow. As a concept, it's interesting to people, but it's only a concept. The Bitcoin is being produced. It's being produced regularly, but your average person can't get it even if they want to get it. And while this is going on, in 2009, Karpos, who had been, I think, had been in Israel for a while, working on another programming scheme of his, left Israel after his internet connection got bombed out, and realized that Israel might be the greatest place to do a programming company. And he anyway come back to Japan with his cat T-Bane on June 18th. On May 22nd, 2010, the very first real-world transaction occurred when a man ordered a pizza. So someone, sent him Bitcoin. He sent them, Bitcoin was sent out. The guy purchased it. He used the Bitcoin purchase to buy himself a pizza. I think people later joked with the $8 million pizza. That was the first time Bitcoin was actually used in a transaction, was to buy a pizza, which seems wildly appropriate. And if the person who had those Bitcoins had kept onto them instead of buying a pizza, he'd probably be a billionaire now or close to a millionaire. So around July 2010, Jed McCaleb has this brilliant idea. He was frustrated that he couldn't get Bitcoin. So he's like, what if we substitute these playing cards for Bitcoin? What could possibly go wrong? Take a website made for trading playing cards and start trading currency for Bitcoin. But that's what he did. And it worked. You could purchase Bitcoin through cash through this website. So he took the infrastructure that was used to exchange cards, and instead of using cards, he used Bitcoin. And it took off. Except Jed wasn't very bright, and he immediately started getting hacked. So, while he's getting hacked, but the company is still working, and people are kind of, realizing Bitcoin being used for things. Around January 1st, 2011, Silk Road arrives on the scene. And what was Silk Road? I like asking people because I want to see how many people actually know. What's Silk Road? Anyone want to raise your hand?
So Silk Road is a site that was originally on Tor, which is a kind of encrypted subnet, and it was a way of providing things that were illegal really to normally trade into.
Yeah. So, well, I thought more people would raise their hands by Silk Road. Isn't this like everybody hasn't they heard of Silk Road? Okay. So you have Bitcoins, right? And you have Bitcoins, and that's great, and they're worth some money. But what can you buy with Bitcoins? One of the values of Bitcoins is it's very hard to trace where the money came from. And that anonymity is kind of wonderful. But the first person to realize that Bitcoin could be really used for a market was the person who designed Silk Road. And whether that was Russ Ulbricht or not, it's still debatable. He may have designed it the beginning of it, but I don't think he saw it through the end. So what Silk Road was basically is you had what is called the Tor Network. Some people refer to it as the dark web. So it are all these websites that are not on Google. They're not made so that you can find them. You can't put them in Google search and find most of them. And it's anonymous to some degree. So you have the Tor Network. It was created by a bunch of hackers, and I'm not going to go into the history of the Tor Network. But you also had the Tor browser, which let you access these websites. And many of these underground websites ended with a .onion. And I'm not like I always thought I was like a .onion, like the parody website, but actually it was really .onion. And on these websites, people began selling, all the things that people would like to buy but find difficult to buy without being seen by law enforcement, and that included drugs, guns, pornography, credit cards, things that you might want to purchase, but you wouldn't want to purchase normally because the police would come and arrest you. And the Silk Road quickly became one of the hottest things on the net. I mean, I think there were people who were looking at the Silk Road, never buying anything, but just kind of fun to go through the list of things. And actually, though I don't think federal law enforcement likes to talk about it too much, off the record, they will say that people were basically very honest on Silk Road, because it was kind of like Amazon. You would sort of get a rating system. So if you were selling someone marijuana or on Silk Road and you didn't deliver, then you got a bad rating. So people were actually purchasing the things they wanted at a fair price, paying for it in Bitcoin, which they obtained from wherever they got, and it was wildly successful. But of course, we don't like people using drugs, and we don't like people buying guns. And there's always, the threat of terrorism, so the police began investigating it. Meanwhile, Silk Road arrives on the scene. On January 11th, 2011, Bitcoin is worth 30 cents on the Mt. Gox exchange. 30 cents. So Mt. Gox is still functioning. There's more people and more people sort of buying Bitcoin now because they realize there's something fun to use it for. But Jed McCaleb is going by this point he's been hacked out of about 80,000 Bitcoins. And he's thinking, this is going to be a problem for me down the road. So he decides he wants to get rid of it, and he sells it to Mark Karpeles, because Karpeles is gullible and trusting, and he's French, and he's jovial, and he's kind of not really realizes what's going on. Silk Road now hits 1,000 users by April that year. So Karpeles has bought this company. He's signed a non-disclosure agreement. He's missing 80,000 Bitcoins, right? Jed sends him a letter. By the way, Mark, thanks for buying the company. You're missing about 80,000 Bitcoins. Maybe you can mine it. And Karpeles is a very, happy-go-lucky kind of guy. And he isn't exactly the most cautious of people. So he's kind of I'm fine with that. But then the most unlucky thing happens to him that could happen to a guy like this is Forbes profiles Bitcoin in an article called Cryptocurrency. And suddenly Bitcoin takes off. I mean, it soars. And by the end of April, the 80,000 Bitcoins that he is missing is worth close to $62,000, which he doesn't have. So as the more Bitcoin is successful, the more money he owes. Now, he could have charged some kind of transaction fee. There would have been a way out of this, but he doesn't ever seem to get it. And as a matter of fact, it isn't really until April 28th, 2011, when Bitcoin prices really surged, that Jed says, by the way, I just want to tell you one more time that you're missing a lot of Bitcoins. I'm sure you can work it out. Anyway, the Karpeles goes on. He's figuring out somehow that things will work out. Meanwhile, Silk Road is doing great. Bitcoin prices keep going up. Mark hires his first employee, Mt. Gox starts booming. It gets hacked. Mt. Gox seems to get hacked all the time. But this was a pretty big hack. But he's able to nip it in the bud, and nobody loses any money, and Mt. Gox goes on. In June 1st, 2011, the website Gawker first reports on the existence of Silk Road. And that becomes a huge story. Like, wow, internet, dark web, underground Amazon marketplace, people buying drugs online, nobody knows who runs it. Law enforcement is baffled. And it's also Gawker, so it's very sensationalized. So on June 9th, 2011, Bitcoin hits 31.91 on Mt. Gox. And he's still missing the coins. Now, at this point, and this is something a lot of people don't know about Karplus, is he actually has a great respect for the law. So as Silk Road starts to take off and people are selling drugs and things on it, and he's realizing, that his exchange is being used to facilitate criminal transactions, he becomes nervous and upset. So he contacts the DEA and tells them, hey, there's all these people who are using this exchange to buy drugs and do some really dubious things. And the DEA basically says, thank you, but fuck off. We're busy, don't bother us. He sends a letter to the DEA on June 10, 2011, he also goes to the Financial Services Agency of Japan and is like, hey, I'm running this currency exchange and we're doing all these things to make sure criminals can't use it, but some criminals are trying to use it and some of them look like, really bad guys, and maybe you guys should look at it. And the FSA says, it's not our jurisdiction. You're handling trading cards, right? We're not interested. So by 2011, Mark starts using what are called cold wallets. So if you've been following the CoinCheck thing, you'll hear about hot wallets versus cold wallets. So cold wallet is basically you take it off of the internet, you put it you print it out or you put it in a USB device, you make sure that people can't access it, they can't steal it offline, right? It's not there anymore, so it can't be gone. Let me put it in other ways. Let's say you have a picture of you and your girlfriend having sex in Dropbox. Are you and your boyfriend having sex in Dropbox? Or whatever, something that you don't want the other people to see. When you take it out of Dropbox and put it on a USB and delete it from the Dropbox, and it's in the USB key, that's the cold wallet. The Dropbox is the hot wallet. In the case of CoinCheck, which got hacked out of about $500 million worth of NEM, they were keeping all of their money in a hot wallet, all the NEM in a hot wallet. Another way that I like to describe it, because I think we'd understand things best by analogy, is imagine you're running a 7-Eleven in a really bad neighborhood. You could keep the $50,000 that you earn at the end of the day and put it in a bank vault where it's secured, or you could leave it in the cash register. And the cash register in the 7-Eleven is the hot wallet. And that's basically what CoinCheck did. They left all their NEM in the hot wallet, didn't put it in the bank because it was cold outside, no one wanted to go to the bank. Why just leave it in the cash register? So Mt. Gox starts putting some of the currency in cold wallets. And probably as they're doing this as they're moving things from the hot wallet to the cold wallets, they probably were hacked again. That's what seems to be. But because they weren't doing any things like reconciling books, that's basic accounting 101. Even I can, if you ever had a checkbook, I had a checkbook once. You see how much money you spend and how much money you're getting in. They weren't basically doing that. So they really, just were functioning on that we have this much money, we assume, without really checking to see how much they'd lost or they'd been hacked out of. But that's incompetence, not evil. Around this time, the Bitcoin white paper by Satoshi Nakamoto is translated into Japanese by Mark's secretary. I think her name is Momoko, I'm not sure. And when they translate Satoshi Nakamoto's papers into the Japanese version of Bitcoin.org, Mark decides that he needs to give Satoshi some kind of Japanese characters for his name, so he just makes them up. Which are the characters? Nakamoto is middle, and Moto is, I think, Genki no Gen, and Satoshi is Tetsugaku, and she is like history, which is philosophically a very interesting idea. But it also led a lot of people to believe, like, well, if he's got a Japanese name, he must really be Japanese. So meanwhile, by October 11, 2011, Ross Ulbricht is linked to the administration of Silk Road for the first time. So the authorities are on the trace of the Silk Road administrator. He is going under a name that he's given himself, taken from one of my favorite movies and books, The Princess Bride, calling himself the Dread Pirate Roberts. So I see people laughing here have all seen that movie. It's a great film. You know, I guess his motto for his customers was "as you wish," but it wasn't as the FBI wished. So Mt. Gox is getting bigger all the time. It signs a contract with Silicon Valley Service Coin Lab. Things are also moving on. Okay. So by June 2012, this is about actually 4 months after Dread Pirate Roberts has announced that he is Dread Pirate Roberts, which is probably the greatest name of a criminal mastermind ever. I can't think of anybody who's had such a great criminal mastermind. I mean, even Pablo Escobar didn't have a great criminal name. He was just Pablo Escobar. But, you know, Russ Ulbricht has some class. So Mt. Gox office moves from the Cerulean Tower to the Round Cross in Shibuya. Mark Karpelis moves to a new home in Meguro Ward. And around this time, and I'm just illustrating this because it doesn't really relate to Mt. Gox or Bitcoin, but it does relate to the Japanese police and how they do investigations, which will be important as we go on. I see that you're all following me so far. So around 2012, somebody begins posting threats on this wildly popular internet board, Ni channel. And the Japanese police over the country arrest about 4 people for making bomb threats, threats on people's lives. And then a couple months after that happens, a hacker comes forward and says, actually, I framed 4 people. None of them did it. And he tells a lawyer, I'm the person that framed these people, and the police have made arrest. One of the guys confesses to making these threats on an internet bulletin board that he never made. And suddenly the police are very embarrassed because they've got a lawyer and some hacker out there coming out and says, hey, I made fools of you all. You've arrested the wrong people because I hacked their computers and I posted threats under somebody else's account. So that's going on. And about this time in 2013, while Mt. Gox is still beginning to have some serious problems, the police actually arrest the guy who made the threats, who's named Yusuke Katayama. So we hit March 2013. The Bitcoin market cap is now $1 billion. So suddenly this jokey thing that was used to buy pizza are something that, libertarians are, hippies, as some would say, were using to buy drugs on the internet, is now worth $1 billion. And that's quite substantial. And also at this time, Silk Road now has 10,000 items for sale, 7,000 of which are drugs. You would think that if you had an underground market that would be a little more variety than just drugs. I was kind of disappointed in the criminal element of this world. Meanwhile, the United States is deciding that we need to regulate this thing because we don't know what it is. And also people in Wall Street are kind of getting nervous too because like, wow, what happens if people don't need banks? What happens if more people would rather use Bitcoin than US dollars? Or would rather use Mt. Gox than Chase Bank. So they began pressuring people to at least regulate the exchanges. So we get to April 1st, 2013. Bitcoin is worth $100 a coin. On April 9th, the value doubles to $200 a coin. So now we're talking serious money. Now we're talking about the time that I'm beginning to think that maybe I would like to buy some Bitcoin. So meanwhile, Karplus is talking to the authorities because they are investigating Silk Road and he is cooperating. And I don't think he's cooperating out of fear. He's cooperating out of the feeling that he wants to run a legitimate business and he doesn't want to be particle to criminal activity. So he has a sense of civic duty. And maybe he's partly motivated because he doesn't want to get his ass in trouble. But really in Japan, they don't give a fuck what he's doing. So the fact that he's actually talking to them doesn't benefit him in any way. He's just doing out of basically because he has a conscience. So a special agent named Duryagian, I can never pronounce this guy's name, and his team transfer $7,000 to Mt. Gox to buy 27.27 Bitcoins and began using it to make purchases on the Silk Road. So this investigation is heating up. But what nobody knew at this time, and we do know later, is that two of the agents on the Silk Road investigation, realizing that Bitcoin's worth a lot of money, start to go in business for themselves. One of them, my favorite, is Special Agent Karl Markforce IV. I think he's the DEA guy, and then there's the Secret Service employee, Sean Bridges. Two very special agents working together to make a lot of money. So Markforce attempts to make contact through Karplus on April 8th through a LinkedIn invitation. Like, hey, Mark, Special Agent Mark Karplus. So he writes to Karplus and says, hey, I see that things aren't going very well with you and one of the currency exchanges in the United States. Why don't you make me your U.S. representative? I can help you out. And Mark completely ignores him. I don't know whether he saw the mail or not, or he just ignores him because he ignores lots of things. But he doesn't. So the response of Force and Bridges are basically, well, fuck you, Mark. So they go ahead and they authorize a seizure of Mt. Gox's funds in the United States of $5 million. So they seize a total of $5 million from Mt. Gox's North American Wells Fargo Dwell account and Karplus' private account. On May 7th, Sean Bridges steals 800,000 Bitcoins from Mt. Gox's account during the investigation into Silk Road that we know of. On May 14th, 2013, Karl Markforce IV writes to Karplus, told you should have partnered with me. So, by now, I'm going to go on a little bit of a digression here. By now, I've been kind of following some of this stuff for a while when I actually hear about this, and I'm just kind of amazed as we go on and learn about Bitcoin and its history and the people involved. It's just how many misfits and crooked people get involved. I mean, even the cops get crooked working on Bitcoin. I mean, it's like it taints everybody. It's kind of impressive because if you wrote a script in which the special agents like backstab the guy that's cooperating with them and start stealing money from the investigation and punish him for not doing business with him, people would laugh at you. It's like it's so complicated, but it's all true. And it's also something that makes me feel sort of sorry for Mark, because here's a guy who keeps trying to do the right thing, and every time he just tried to get the right thing, it's like no good deed goes unpunished. He's either the luckiest guy in the world or the unluckiest guy in the world, and I can't figure it out. So having $5 million of your assets frozen in the U.S. is not good for business. And I think this causes some of the problems that accelerated the collapse of Mt. Gox. Because they're out of $5 million in their own cash, in their own assets that they had in the U.S. And that's like operating money, because that's basically how they were using it. So by July 2013, Teiko Kredit Bank, which is Japan's largest and most respected credit rating agency, reviews Mt. Gox, and it gives the bank a D4, which is the worst possible rating a company can receive on their scale. I've got there's a guy here who used to do corporate research for a large investment bank, and I think if you asked him, he would tell you, I've never seen a D4. I mean, it's monumentally bad. Meanwhile, the Dread Pirate Roberts is really famous, and Forbes actually interviews this guy who claims to be the Dread Pirate Roberts for 4 hours through the Tor and Silk Road messaging system. And they publish an article entitled, An Interview with the Digital Drug Lord, the Silk Road's Dread Pirate Roberts. It's the only purported interview given to someone behind the Silk Road. But later it will turn out that this interview doesn't appear to actually be an interview with Russ Ulbricht, which raises the question that the person really running Silk Road. Okay, all right, let's see the sign from Kyle. Don't we have till 9?
Yeah, but we have a lot of people, I think.
Okay, question. All right, going to move on. Meanwhile, Mark Karpeles launches the Bitcoin Cafe project. So what do you do when you're running a Bitcoin exchange with $500 million? Do you crack down on your cybersecurity? Do you make sure that everything's running good? Do you reconcile your accounts? No. You try to create a cafe where people can use Bitcoin to buy coffee. And he gets everything designed, even including these really beautiful Bitcoin Cafe mugs, one of which I managed to keep. So someday I'm going to sell that on like eBay for like a couple $100. Dread Pirate Roberts contacts Karpeles at one point, September 1st, 2013. And while he's doing this, Mt. Gox is probably hacked again, and more coins disappear. Meanwhile, the Silk Road investigation is going on. We're hitting September of 2013. Police are closing in on Ulbricht. Our friends Karl Mark Force and Sean Bridges approach Ulbricht and say, hey, guess who's been we've got somebody who's been ratting out on you, the French maid. If you give us $100,000, we'll tell you who he is. So they extort money from the guy they're investigating, and they give up Mark Karpeles. Yeah. By October 1st, 2013, Ross Ulbricht, the nominal creator of Silk Road, is arrested by the FBI. On November 2013, the Bitcoin price exceeds $1,000 on Mt. Gox. It's $1,000 a coin. Remember it was $100 a coin? Remember it was 30 cents a coin? It's now worth $1,000. Mt. Gox is handling as much as $20 million a day in transactions on January 20th. And then in February, Mark informs a former employee that he's been looking at the books, and guess what? They're missing about 850,000 Bitcoins, which is worth $500 million. So they work around a plan to maybe keep the company afloat. The Winklevoss twins, the sort of like the evil twins of the Bitcoin universe, are in. They're creating a plan to save the company. Somebody leaks out the entire plan to a blogger. That gets out, everybody withdraws, Mt. Gox collapses. There's a press conference. Karpeles files a complaint with the police. The police begin to investigate. The money is gone. Nobody knows where it is. A year goes by. People are wondering what's happening, and I'll tell you what's happening. The Japanese police are investigating. They're trying to figure out where these coins are gone. Everybody is upset. This is really putting a damper on Japan's plan to be like a sort of cryptocurrency exchange. The high-tech crimes unit is working with Mark Karpeles, and suddenly, in the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department, the white-collar crimes department says, we're taking over. So they do what cops usually do in Japan. They arrest him on the flimsiest charges they can find, hoping that if they hold him for 23 days, he will confess to stealing the coins, and they will solve the case. But he doesn't confess. And they arrest him again. And then they arrest him again. And they arrest him about 3 or 4 times before the judge tells the police and the prosecutors, stop doing this. And so after all this happens, more than a year and a half goes by. They finally have to let him out on bail because they don't really have a case. And as things stand right now, Karpeles is on bail. He is still on trial. The police have no idea where the hacked coins are. None of the charges relating to Mark Karpeles' being in jail and being on trial have to do with the missing Bitcoins. And earlier in the year, and I'm saving this up in an article, but I'm still waiting for the police to get back to me, the police said in testimony, oh yeah, we found huge evidence of a hacking, but related to these missing Bitcoins, but my supervisor told me we were just going to try and arrest Karpeles and convict him on these petty charges, so we didn't really look at it. And that's not surprising, because if you look at the failure of the Katayama case, the Japanese police have very bad history of being able to solve cyber crimes. But somebody went to jail, and Karpeles will finally be probably found guilty of some measly crime. But the coins that were missing and hacked, the Japanese police will never find because they would have to work with outside law enforcement. And in the middle of his trial, Homeland Security investigations arrested a Russian who they announced had played a critical role in the hacking of Mt. Gox, a hacking that the Japanese government and the Japanese police have not solved and won't admit that happened. So there we are. Bitcoin trades. There are some companies here that are making a lot of money doing it. Increasingly, the firms are being regulated. Mark Karpeles is still on trial, the man who helped popularize Bitcoin. And if there's sort of any moral to this story, it seems to be that, they say money is the root of all evil, but it's originally the love of all money is the root of all evil. And in many cases in Japan, I guess that, the other moral of this tale is if you're unlucky enough to be a pioneer in a field and things go wrong, you're going to be paying for it in one way or another. And that's the moral pay the devil in Bitcoin, that justice is not done, and that Bitcoin is not necessarily evil, but the love of Bitcoin drives people to do some pretty crazy things.